Hello and welcome to Dialogues with Mayank. Following is a conversation with Dr. Namrata Goswami, who is an independent senior analyst, an author, and a Minerva grantee. We talk about a lot of things here. We talk about northeastern states, about Naga's plight, Mizoram. We talk about Indo-China, US and China, COVID in China. We also talk about outer space. So we start from northeastern states, go all the way to China, US, and we touch outer space. We have broken down the conversation into three parts. This is where we talk about Indo-China, COVID in China, US, some Chinese policies. So, Dr. Goswami, now that you have mentioned economy, shutdown, and COVID, there is one question that Dheeraj and I have discussed a lot and we somewhat differ. I'll pass that question to you. It is, how viable is a total economic shutdown right now in India?
So it depends. So if you look at the COVID-19 situation, especially in some of the metropolitan cities, right, in India, for example, Delhi and Mumbai. I think Mumbai is not as worse off as Delhi. I know Pune, there are lots of cases as well. So in terms of what COVID does to the economy, so I think we'll have to look at it from the general trends perspective. And I would be interested to hear your perspective as well. So if you look at what COVID has done, for example, to the US and the developed world, except China, which actually recorded the only positive growth in the economy in 2020. And that's because China was able to deal with the virus at a very draconian level, close down the economy, especially close down Wuhan and any movement out of Wuhan where the virus, which was the epicenter. And then I think they had this very strict monitoring of where people were going. They use apps to, especially trace those who had COVID and contact tracing. They did not allow people to come out of their homes. They delivered everything into the homes. And so that's what they are claiming. We don't know. Now they see the issue is that we don't know if that is the actual reality, because they are not transparent and they don't have a free press like we have in, say, India or the US, right? So, but at least what they are projecting, and with the kind of economic recovery that it's been verified by the Western press they have had, seems like they have been able to at least manage the virus to the level that it does not affect the economy. Now, the US
last a little bit surprising. Sorry to disturb, but the recovery that China has is also very surprising.
Yes, but China, you see, historically, since the 1978, has been the manufacturer of the world, right? And so even for COVID-related equipment, for example, ventilators or N95 masks, they continued producing and continued earning a lot of money. It's really ironic that when the US, especially when New York was becoming like what is happening in Delhi today, where there was lack of ventilators and we had a very huge uptick of COVID cases. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, I remember in the meetings at that time, was saying that they were running out of ventilators and oxygen supply, and they depended on China for that. That was a wake-up call for the US at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. I'd like to say, like, this China dependence that has drastically increased in the COVID time. So you think that gave China leverage over the WHO?
I think China played it to its advantage. So, for example, if you look at the COVID-19 white paper that was issued by the State Council, which is the highest policy-making body in China, it's a long document. I've read it. It's available open source, so you can also see it. In there, China claimed that they, in fact, gave day-by-day statistics of what was happening in Wuhan and some of the other areas which had COVID uptick, how the Chinese government responded to the virus, the kind of medical facilities that they established in anticipation of virus increasing. They had these makeshift hospitals. In fact, China built one of the largest hospitals in a matter of 2 weeks for COVID patients. Do you remember those reporting at that time? This was last year. And so in that context, I think China actually has taken advantage, to your question, Dheeraj, that it used its, first of all, its domination in terms of COVID equipment, including ventilators. It took advantage of the fact that it is the largest supplier of medicines related to, chronic diseases in the developed world, including in the United States. It also used diplomacy. So, for example, during COVID, when Italy was reeling under the virus and old people were dying very quickly, China was one of the first countries to send their doctors and medical supplies to
Right.
Italy and Brazil. So yes, it has taken advantage of the fact that before COVID, it was one of the leading manufacturers of these capabilities. And once crisis hit, and it takes time, for example, the US has started investing in its own capacity today, but it wouldn't see the light of the day as quickly as you would hope, right?
Right.
And so it's still dependent on China. And so I think China took advantage of that. And that's why the World Health Organization, first of all, China is a member. And secondly, China contributes to the World Health Organization financially and otherwise, and that creates pressure points.
Right.
There is still investigation going on, so we don't know what the exact reason was, why the WHO was so reticent in holding China responsible for how the virus was handled in the beginning months, which was October, December 2019. And so we are still waiting for that.
Right. If they would have handled it well, it should not have gone to Italy and Spain and countries like that. But then
because closed down, right? So your question about an complete economic lockdown, or in India now, it'll depend. Like in the US, US has had a negative economic return in 2020 when it was the most infected by the virus. Now it's slowly becoming more normal because the US vaccination effort is really high. And so under President Trump, he basically, under Operation Warp Speed, he got a lot of the the vaccination by Pfizer, Biotech, and others. And so now President Biden has come and he's also made the delivery of vaccines a priority. And we have access to vaccines in the US till the age group of 12 now. So that also has resulted in the US being able to open up to the extent that it has today. Now for India, it'll depend. So I'm hearing stories that the vaccination, delivery and the vaccination effort is not at the level that it should be. Because the one thing we cannot forget is that India's population is 1.2 billion. US population is about 300 million. So you're dealing with a much larger population, right?
Right.
But I am hoping that India is able to double its efforts of vaccination. So then the economy it'll depend. So because I have had stories, at least on social media, that those who had the vaccine, the 2 doses of the vaccine, they were able to fight off the virus better than those who had just 1 dose or did not have any vaccination, right? So it's not that they did not get infected, but their body fought the virus better, despite the fact that they were older, including some of the people I know. So I think it'll all depend on that. And also inflation rates, right? If inflation
exactly
rates,
that's my question. Yeah.
So if inflation goes up, then your ability to buy goes down, and that will also have a devastating effect on the economy. So all these factors matter.
What do you think about the stimulus checks that have been rolling out in the US? That should increase the inflation rate?
Yes, it should. And there is a concern because US debt, if you look at the debt ratio data that I just looked at it yesterday, it was $28 trillion, right?
Right?
So it's a huge amount. So the debt is high and the inflation is going to, and that's a concern because if inflation goes up, as you know, the economy, decreases. And so there are these concerns. But I think in the US, what's happening is that the hope is that once you give out these stimulus checks, which the Trump administration and then the Biden administration has continued, the hope is that it'll actually build into the economy and create jobs, and people will use that stimulus checks for investments that also brings up the economy in stocks, for example, right? And so these are the hopes, but they will be facing this problem in terms of debt. In fact, I should look up the debt, US debt today, and see how much it is. There is a website that gives you the US national debt clock, and that tells you how much the debt is. So today it's still 28.
Right. And the other side of argument for stimulus checks is, for example, if you give people money for doing nothing, they'll end up doing nothing in the future.
Yes, and also that they would not take up the jobs then. But I think Biden has, I think, recently clarified that those who, I mean, we should verify this, but at least what I've read in the newspaper is that he stated that those who have had the ability to get jobs and have not taken them and have basically wanted to take unemployment benefits, they will not be allowed to get those benefits because you have to truly make the case that you could not get a job.
Right.
True.
So I think they have recognized this problem that those with stimulus check, are not accepting jobs, and that can create issues. Because I see a lot of signs coming up. I live in Montgomery, Alabama, and I see a lot of signs coming up asking for help and jobs. And it's not like the economy is not generating jobs because it's opening up now.
True.
But and I think Biden administration has recognized that problem.
I think I agree with Mayank here. If you give out stimulus checks, there is the argument that innovation goes up, but my theory is that innovation goes down because the need for innovation goes down. So
to an extent, because if you look at how, so you have to look at it at a larger level, right? For example, those in Silicon Valley, for example, or those who are in the game of innovation, including high-end innovation in for example, building apps or any kind of innovation, they will still want to continue investing that because that means long-term return. Because stimulus checks are not able to sustain you to the level that you would want to be sustained, right? $1,200 is not much in the US. Or Biden giving about $4,200 to the family or $8,000 with children, it might sustain you for a few months, but it will not sustain you beyond that. And so there will be it could result in what you're saying for a few months, but then the innovation cycle will kick in. And at least the people I talk, for example, in space startups, which is looking at innovation, including building social infrastructure, build on space satellite support, helping COVID data be generated. They are truly investing in those capacities. So, but as I said, these are speculations. We still have to see if what does this kind of stimulus checks do to the economy. So the long-term effects will have to be seen if we also follow studies that follow those patterns. So we'll have to wait and see.
So coming back to the shutdown point,
yeah,
do you think shutting down the economy is making more problems than reducing? Because as you said, China is thriving, but we know how transparent China is, and that GDP growth can be only the top 1% of the businesses thriving, just like Amazon or the bigger companies.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
So do you think I'm talking about the small businesses, and I heard that 60% of the small businesses are not going to reopen after this pandemic. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I made this point in a previous podcast that if somebody has diabetes, right, and they owned a small business, they could have treated themselves. But right now with the COVID pandemic, their source of income has gone away. So now they are in the threat of dying of diabetes and the threat of dying of coronavirus. So do you think that's justifiable, or we should put community over the individual?
It's such a catch-22 question, right? So on the one hand, we know from medical advice that at areas that suffer from high uptick of COVID cases, isolation is absolutely required, right? So that more people do not get infected. But then the catch-22 point is that people will also have to generate income for their livelihood, as you mentioned, especially small businesses. And small businesses face that. And that's why Trump was basically, and Biden today, is having to ensure that the economy is slowly opening up, because there is pressure, there is a lobby that while big companies like Amazon have actually fared better during the COVID-19 because everybody's buying online, right? And so their services are, in fact, I think Amazon had one of the highest return of profits in 2020. So because it offers all these services, and some of the services were actually very good for people like me, like if I wanted to.
Exactly. They also support smaller businesses. It's not like Amazon is here to steal everybody's money. They
No,
put
no,
more
because
money
yes,
in
right, go ahead.
small businesses pocket than anybody else. Like, this is the point that like the communists make, that Amazon and Mark Zuckerberg is eating everybody's food. Like, I don't think that's true. Like, if it wasn't for the internet, we couldn't have had this podcast. So like, it's a major empowering point. So you were saying Amazon was allowed you to.
Yes, I was saying, and your point, Dheeraj, is that I think people misunderstand the Amazon platform. So they think this is this large conglomerate that is basically big corporation. But, small businesses actually use the Amazon platform to sell their stuff, right?
True.
So including, I have seen businesses that started innovating and making masks, and then they sell it on the Amazon platform. Amazon, of course, takes as part of the profit, but then you at least are making some money. Amazon is not about just Apple selling its phones on Amazon. It's about
True.
small businesses selling things, local grocers using Amazon to, use their, services. I had
logistics and retail. Yeah.
And the United Postal Service is one of the main logistics sector that is continuing to have jobs because Amazon offers it the viability of, delivering the packets, right? Because we have stopped writing letters, so now they're doing some other service here. So I think, but your question about small businesses, yes, they have tried to, innovate and start using online platforms, including Amazon. And there is another platform in the US for local artists, because artist community was most hit by COVID, and in India, I'm sure it's the same case. So then there is a website called Etsy, which basically caters to small businesses and very local, not just artist community, but those who do, do it yourself, capabilities. Right. And you can buy it from this platform. Now, Etsy is a big platform too, like Amazon, but then it offers that possibility. So now, in terms of, if you look at small businesses, I mean, in India, small businesses are one of the key ways in which our people actually have a livelihood.
True.
And so
I read.
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but I read 14% of our GDP is ration stores only.
Yeah, so you can imagine, and ration stores are there everywhere in India, right? As a child, I remember going to the ration store to get our grain and, our pulses, and you needed that ration card. But anyway, so the point is that if you close down these services because of the fear of COVID, which is a genuine fear, because there is the huge community spread in India, but then you'll have to think about how would you then generate income for the families that depend on that. I mean, you can use online platforms, but in India, sometimes the reach of the internet is not very high in rural areas, right? It's not like in cities. So the broadband is not very good. There is you get cut off when you're ordering something. It takes hours. So I think you have to make that decision very rationally. And in fact, to be a policymaker in this situation is not easy, because first of all, you'll be accused, if you do not close down the economy, of being irresponsible, right? Because COVID is rising. But then you also have to think about, okay, but if I close down the economy, how will small businesses make a livelihood for themselves? In fact, people might, as you were mentioning, because of if someone has diabetes and cannot generate enough money to be able to deal with the virus because everything is closed down, and get isolated, that can actually result in higher levels of death, right? So it is really a catch-22 situation. And unlike, say, China or Southeast Asia, for example, in South Korea, they also had contact tracing, but they had very high level of internet service and broadband. China has 5G, it's even farther ahead of the US. And
The
so
infrastructure is there for small businesses to capitalize over the crisis. Like,
yes, and also it was there before the crisis happened, right? And
Mhm.
so
Okay.
I mean, India, for example, there is, of course, since I grew up, we have mobile phones now that adds to, everybody has a mobile phone, right? And so that is very important, but then that's not enough. You need to have sustained infrastructure, and local businesses depend on local, customers.
True.
And and the other thing in India, which I think has resulted in the uptick of the virus, is because uh, I think the community started going to religious festivals and Bihu functions in Assam, and that also led to spread. And so the second wave, and again, because there was this assumption that because India did not have a rise in COVID cases when the US was having it, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So there was an assumption that in India there is a level of immunity because we are already exposed to so many viruses in the environment.
And our diet, I think it's a fact. I heard it on a Joe Rogan podcast. So there's this doctor, I don't remember his name, but he said we have turmeric and seafood and other anti-inflammatory spices in our food that led to higher immunity than so the Italians eat a lot of carbs, right? So I think we have the immunity, but as you said, like irresponsibly like going out and all of that, it
Yeah. So the main thing
the
is
virus more.
people are very ignorant. And even I have seen people, I have talked to people who still think that COVID is a propaganda and it still does not exist. So we still have people like that. So that is also one
Yeah,
reason.
and yes, I know, and it's because I think when the I agree with you, Dheeraj, and Mayank too, that there is ignorance that, and as you mentioned, Dheeraj, that there was this feeling of immunity because of the articles that said that, because people were puzzled, right, that why is India not having a uptick in virus? It could be something in the diet, it could be something in the atmosphere, it could be that Indians have higher levels of immunity. But I think the scientific danger is that the virus is adapting and changing.
True.
So
True.
because of that, we have to be very careful. Like even if we are vaccinated, at least this is my personal opinion. Somebody else might disagree with me, and disagreements are always good. So I have been vaccinated. I have taken the Pfizer. But despite that, when I go out, I wear a mask and I'm very careful. I come back home and wash my hands. So wherever I go, I have a hand sanitizer because we don't know how the virus is going to change, right?
Right.
And secondly, I don't know if the vaccination. I know I'm protected, but with the virus changing, I don't know if the vaccine will protect me to the extent that, because the vaccine is also in an experimental stage, right?
True.
And Pfizer, of course, have come up with a statement saying that the vaccination is capable of fighting the different variants. But that's very good to hear. But it's always good to be careful. But I would also be a bit compassionate because living in a small town like Montgomery, it's much more easier to have distances and isolation. I mean,
True.
imagine if you live in a place like, say, Old Delhi, right, where the lanes are crowded. People live in very crowded apartments, and people have to go out to get their basic needs.
True.
Right? And so you cannot compare these two cases. I mean, you cannot ever compare Norway and Norway's level of infection with 5 million people to India, which is very different.
Right.
So I think we also have to keep the context always in mind.
Mike, should I ask a
Yeah,
question?
sure.
Okay. So you said US is now like investing in its own facilities because like the China dependence like hit them at such a devastating time. So I'd like to ask you about how, so there is this dilemma that every business owner has in US and in India. So as a patriot, you want to make and produce your products locally so that you support your economy, you control the supply. But when you put on a CEO or business owners hat, you have to cut down your how do I say this? You have to cut down your costs to make higher profits. So there is, so how does, as a business owner, do you suggest that there is this Make in India project, and should we outsource it from China? Because I'm thinking I should start a business. So you think, should I outsource my products from China, or should I start producing it in India?
So the economy we live in today is global, right? So the supply chains are global, you know, even if you, and it depends on the product. So for example, if you are dependent on, say, rare earth materials, like for your product, you will have to source it from China because China is the leader in rare earth material. Now, if you're building an iPhone, you will have to get your chips from Taiwan, because Taiwan is the lead producer of semiconductors and everything else that the iPhone requires. But of course, Taiwan is not China. And so what China has done in the last, and this is something of concern to the US and India as well, that what China has done very effectively in the last few decades is that, especially under President Xi, when he came to power in 2013, and before him, Hu Jintao. So China recognized that there are certain areas of manufacturing that is vital in terms of building yourself into an indispensable nation, and they prioritize such investments. So for example, manufacturing of, say, medical supplies, manufacturing of rare earth material, where China is the leader today. Some of the rare earth material that I'm talking about, you even need it for your defense manufacturing. For example, US defense manufacturing, right? So you can say that I am going to do it locally, but then you'll have to see if you have the resources and the raw material for building that, right? Now, Dheeraj, it depends. I mean, if you are, I don't know what kind of facility or manufacturing base you want to build. Now, if you want to build textile, you can absolutely source it in South Asia. Bangladesh is one of the most important country for textile manufacturing. India is also not behind. Indian textile is very popular all around the world. But if
Malaysia as well,
right? And so, but then if you're telling me that, no, I want to build a phone, or because of the fact that you have, let's take a situation where you want to start a space startup, right? Where I work on. Now, if you want to build a rocket, you can do it indigenously, but then space startups also collaborate, internationally. Now, you can take a conscious decision not to source it from China, but source it from, say, another country, and use their facility or infrastructure. For example, the United Arab Emirates, which has a very vibrant space sector today. But the cost will, of course, be high. Because the employment, everything is high. So you have to make those conscious decisions, but sometimes we don't know. Even if the fact that you might be investing more now, you might actually have return, you can always add it to the price. But that is again a catch-22, because customers always want to buy things cheaper. That is why China is so much integrated to the world, right? I go to Walmart here, almost everything is made in China. So you might talk about the fact that you want to manufacture things elsewhere. For example, the US wants to manufacture things here, but the cost of labor is very high here.
True.
And so then as a consumer, I'll have to pay that price. And we always look for cheaper possibilities, right? So now there could be conscious decisions like shifting the base to, say, somewhere else in Southeast Asia, which is happening. For example, countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia are coming in. You can also shift your manufacturing base to, say, Africa, which is going to become important in the next 30 years. But it'll take time, because China has already established those supply chains, right?
Yeah. And they have also invested in Africa very heavily, because they see that Africa has cheap labor and they can overthrow their supplied monopoly.
Yeah, China actually prioritized investment in Africa much before anyone else, and especially countries like Sudan, which has oil, Nigeria. So they have very strategically developed their China-Africa relation. And some of the articles I have read coming out of Africa is that the concern that other countries are rising about China's investment is because they don't have a piece of the pie and we are actually benefiting. So China has also played a very good propaganda game in Africa. The US is waking up to it now, especially the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration has recognized that China is one of the lead competitors in terms of international relations. But China has already invested so many years in this, right? So even to be able to compete, you'll have to be very focused in terms of that competition.
Mhm. So, one last question. How do you think, does automation solve this Chinese dominance problem? And if it does, how does that affect the tensions between, say, China and India, or China or US?
So automation is, of course, coming in, including in China. So China is investing heavily in automation capability. So first of all, there is concern, which has been historical, right? For example, if you look at the cars that Ford built, historically it was manufactured in Detroit, for example, and used human labor, right? Michigan, sorry. And then now what happens is that it uses automation. And so because of that, human labor was not required, but then other industries propped up, which human labor became important. So in terms of China, US automation, I mean, one of the industries that China is investing heavily in is artificial intelligence and robotics and automation. Right. And so including Tesla has now opened up a facility in China, and China is investing in such automation capability. China is the largest producer of cars in the world, overtook the US a few years ago. And so they have recognized that automation will become the future, and they have started investing in that particular capacity. So the tensions might be there. But then again, the question of context and you know it more than me, finances and the economy. So how much does it cost to maintain an automation manufacturing unit in the US? Because after all, you'll still need the maintenance, right? How much does it cost to maintain an automation industry, say in China? So you have to do, right? So you have to do. And as you know, the Chinese government is subsidizing this particular capacity.
Exactly. They've also subsidized electric cars, just like the Scandinavians. And I don't know why we haven't done it yet, but talking to you, it has made me realize that in every aspect, China is like one step ahead.
It's way out of league.
Yes, because what they did is that they had meetings where they recognized what are the core technologies. They also realized the critical importance of supply chain. So one of the concerns that China has is that it is very dependent on Taiwan for semiconductor technology. And so today what China is doing is that it's starting to prioritize and invest in capital, especially human capital, to establish a semiconductor industry in Shenzhen, China, which is their Silicon Valley, right? So, and they're drawing international talent. They pay like salaries which are competitive. So they can draw talent from Europe, for example. They have many people from Europe there. And Shanghai is a very global city. You have people working in Shanghai from all over the world. So in that context, what they have done is that they have realized that, okay, next, in the future, it will be robotics, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, automation. We need to prioritize those sectors. And so President Xi, like Modi, came up with a policy called Made in China Policy 2025, where he highlighted three areas: innovation, high-end technology, and space, as three critical areas for China to invest in. Because what is again interesting, because I study China, what I realized is that they see all these investments not just from a propaganda perspective or an ideological perspective, but they have done studies where they realize that the return of investment is very high. So for example, let me give you a concrete example. So that China now has an independent navigation system, right? The Baidu navigation system.
Right. It was launched recently, right?
Very recent, last year. So it is an alternative to the US GPS. And they are saying that they're going Yeah. And so they're saying that they are going to develop it to the level that they will have 100% more efficiency. I mean, let's see, that's a claim, but they're claiming. Now, in terms of their assessment studies that the China Navigation Center did, so the initial investment on the Beidou was 9 billion, but then the economic assessment told them that they would spend 9 billion in terms of infrastructure, but the return of investment annually is $59 billion because other industries depend on navigation, including airplanes, ships, cruises, right? So they pay for the services or apps or conversations we have. And so they have done such assessments for almost everything. And so now it'll depend on whether they can continue to attract talent, or can the US continue to attract talent, and who has the more attractive economic vision. So we have to deal with this issue. So automation is one of their core priorities as well.
Also, China from the very beginning has been using their own products only. For example, they have from the start, they in a way boycott everything that comes from outside, because I think they don't use Facebook and WhatsApp. They have their own WeChat and stuff like that. So it's from
Yes, go ahead.
So it's from the very beginning that they have their own product which they use, and they don't use generally the things that are coming from outside. So it's I'm saying it's like it's rooted in there.
Yeah, I think, but there is a difference, Mayank. So, I mean, your point is valid that they use social media products like Weibo because they're scared. They don't want to have an open conversation. They want to control everything.
Yes, that is also one point. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a Twitter, which is their equivalent of Weibo, or if you have Baidu, which is their equivalent of Google, they don't want to have Google or Twitter because they don't control. Then Twitter will control, right? Or Google will control what we see.
Right.
But then they don't want conversations around Communist Party of China, corruption. They don't want conversations around Tibet and what is happening in Tibet. They don't want conversations around Xinjiang and the human right violation there. They don't want any critique of their party leadership, especially President Xi. Now, and because they have their own social media platforms, they are always controlling the narrative. They allow some narratives to continue, like pollution.
Right.
People can talk about pollution level. People can talk about Japanese, being, not good to the Chinese. They can talk about India-China relation. They can talk about US, but they can't talk about internal issues or criticize the Communist Party of China. Now, to your question in terms of products, China actually is heavily dependent on export of oil through the Persian Gulf. It does not have its own oil sufficiency like the US has now because of fracking. China does not. Chinese consumers buy international products. In fact, they are one of the largest of iPhone.
Luxury products as well.
Yes. In fact, when I visited Shanghai, I was shocked at the amount of luxury cars on the streets, like a Lamborghini, right? I don't see it in Montgomery, but I see it in every corner in China. So you can imagine the amount of money that is there in the economy, right? And so I think what they have done is this. So, and this is why I think they're a lesson to be studied. So when COVID-19 happened, one of the biggest concern was to generate money for the economy, right? And so, of course, many of the products that Chinese buy are manufactured in China. For example, the iPhone is manufactured in China. So you make money out of that. You don't make money from high-end technology, but you make money from manufacturing. You are paid labor costs for that. Now, Tesla has started, and I think recently was wanting to establish a manufacturing facility in Shanghai. I think there are some concerns because China recently released a report saying that Tesla brakes are not doing well, and there is some problem with that, but I'm sure that will again be sorted out. And so the point I'm making is that what China did during COVID is that it encouraged internal consumption. So what happens is that once people buy the products that are, even if international, but manufactured in China, the demand for the labor goes up, right? So you continue to have a generation of income, generation of, income and GDP, and that's why it did so well. China produced the largest amount of N95 masks for the world. So you can imagine how much labor that generated. And because of the exchange rates, because you buy in dollars, you also earn money in dollars. And so And so, and in a sense, they're very nationalistic when it comes to their consumption pattern. They also have local platforms like Alibaba, which has the largest e-commerce day in the world, generated the highest amount of selling last year during COVID. It's a challenge to Amazon. So yeah, so so to Mayank's question about the fact that they buy their own products. So in a sense, during the COVID-19 pandemic, as I was mentioning, they had this very clever policy of encouraging their own domestic consumption, so that the economy for the manufacturing of those goods continued, and then which generated the money so that people can spend. And also they had these, as I mentioned before, the infrastructure for online platforms, 5G that supports very quick broadband through their mobile platforms. And so in a sense, they generated their own economy. And also because they are so closed, they did not have the same level of news, for example, of COVID spreading or people fearful. They
Right.
very much control the narrative, unlike in India, right? So much fear now because of people dying, and also because there's misinformation, and the press is free. So and in the US, so they have an advantage in that. I mean, it should never be the case that we live in a situation where we are not allowed or do not have our freedom of speech. But China very much controls the narrative they want their own people to hear.
Right. Also, it's in their law, I think, that you have to share every data that your app has collected. And if you don't do it, it's illegal. So you'll have to share everything that your app is collecting, which is why I think we had banned a lot of apps here in India.
Yeah, including I think India has banned TikTok, right? Which is a
Right.
Chinese platform. Yeah, so they do have these very intrusive privacy policies.
Right.
And the ability for people to protest is very weak. And in fact, here, if something like that happens, is unthinkable, right? Because you have constitutional, guarantees, and India has fundamental rights. And so it's a very different system that we are dealing with.
Right.
So I'd like to ask, coming back to the point of patriot versus a businessman. So not only this supply chain is dominated in China. So as you said, there are luxury brands like flooded in China. So as a business, it's also a new untapped market. It's one of the biggest untapped market there is. Who has the buying authority? So like so right now, like about 2 weeks ago, Nike questioned that like, is there child labor involved in the production of Nike products? They stopped their production, and it like cost them around like $500 million or $1 billion, something like that.
Oh, this is in China or in India?
China.
Oh, I see.
They asked China if there is any child labor involved, and they shut down their productions.
Oh, that's very that's unique. And also that, as you then your point about the values versus profits, right? So you have a particular value system, and I think there was also this questioning of Apple products, because there was a concern that some of the products were being forcefully made in Uyghur concentration camp, which is a big issue here.
Right.
And so there was that particular concern as well. Yeah, so value system versus whether you want to, have your products manufactured in a very constricted, exploitative labor environment. But the tragedy is that Chinese labor has always been viewed as being exploitative, right? People work very long hours, they get very minimal pay, the conditions are not good. And the concern that was raised in some of the hearings in Congress is that when Americans visit to see the facilities, they of course show you the best facilities, right? And do not show you the actual places where, things are being manufactured. So that concern was also raised. So that's always an issue. But the irony is that despite that, American and Western companies have continued to manufacture, because your point, Dheeraj, is that when you wear the hat of a business person, you're also looking for profits. And sometimes profits dominate, in terms of cheap labor, because the fact that where you can manufacture it cheaply, you actually can return much higher investment because you don't pay as much for labor. And there are other loopholes in the system. And so the other thing which China has done in the last few months is that once their Beidou navigation system became active, they made it mandatory for cars and other trucks to have Beidou in their GPS systems or their navigation system. And if you do not do that, then licenses will not be given out. Now, think of the situation. China is one of the largest consumers of luxury brands, including Volkswagen, Audi, BMWs, Tesla.
Okay.
Tesla is not as high, but
That's
then,
leverage.
right? That's leverage. So they can say, okay, if you don't have this, we'll not give you the license to sell. So then European companies, especially German car companies, would say, okay, well, then we better have what we can't help it. The market, we have a huge market and we'll lose out. And not everybody can take a Nike decision because they depend on that, right?
Okay.
Nike also has Malaysia to produce it, but you're saying it's a new market. Yeah.
It's a huge market. Yeah.
So you're saying they have to embed their new navigation system in cars that they're selling outside China or only in China?
Only in China, because China is one of the largest consumers, and probably will become the largest consumer because the population is the largest in the world, and they have now buying power.
Okay.
So the Chinese authorities have now said that you have to have Beidou in your car should be able to access Beidou as well, and if it doesn't, then we will not give you the license. So
I think I can live with that. If it comes to you have to have Beidou in India, I think that will be a problem.
Yes, because you don't know what else is happening with Beidou, right? And they can use that as a leverage as well.
So I am really excited to see how the Beidou pans out in near future.
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
I'm saying I'm really excited to see how their navigation system Beidou pans out in near future, because right now they have it in space. And
yes. Yeah, because Beidou is a state-funded navigation system. In fact, the start of Beidou was because during the Taiwan Strait crisis in 1996, where China and Taiwan were escalating their conflict, China basically released 3 missiles that they were launching on Taiwan. Now, at that time, they did not have their own independent navigation system and depended on the US global positioning system, right?
Okay.
And so the speculation, there is no clear investigation or verification of this, but the speculation that came out of the PLA at that time was that they lost sight of their missiles. They could not find where their missiles were, and they fell, of course, into the waters, not on Taiwan, but their speculation and concern was that that's because the U.S. Air Force, which controls the GPS system and basically maintains it, cut off the signal. And so at that time, and this is basically an allegation, it has not been proved, but the reason of that allegation is critical because that was the year that China decided to establish its own navigation system. And it took them so many years since then. And last year they have their fully independent navigation system. So your question in terms of how it pans out, there are two ways it can pan out. One is that there is the civilian side, right? Where Beidou will offer what GPS offers, say in Southeast Asia and Asia and Africa that they are targeting, including Latin America. So they will offer services that depend on navigation. They will help apps. They'll do a lot of things that the GPS does. I don't know with the same efficiency. It is not at the same level today, but might reach that level. Now, militarily, what it does is that now China has its own independent system to guide their missiles, to navigate their warships, to navigate their military fighter planes, and have an independent command and control. We saw the impact of a navigation system during the first Gulf War. I was young then, but do you remember where on our TV screens we saw the Scud and the Patriot missiles during the first Gulf War, where they targeted each other, and the US Patriot missile was able to counter the Scud missile?
I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so that was based on satellite support, right? And radar
Mm-hmm.
and capability to monitor the Scud missiles that were being launched from Iraq during the first Gulf War. And so that was the time we realized all over the world the critical role space plays in military systems and military command and control. And so China today is the second country after the US to have a independent navigation system that has military implications.
The thing is, we weren't
So,
there when the Gulf War happened, actually. But yes,
Oh, sorry, what did you say?
I think we weren't there when the Gulf War happened, actually. 1991.
Oh, I see. Right, right.
okay, so before, I know our time is running out, and
Yeah.
we're so sorry to hold you for so long. But before we move on to space, I'd like to ask you this last question. That's kind of related to China, but I see this communist ideology bleeding into the liberal arts space. Do you have any idea like why is that? And I don't think that's only a first world phenomenon. I think it's happening in India as well. So do you think, do you know like why, if it's happening or not, or why is it happening more and more?
Yeah, so that's a very good academic question, Dheeraj, because if you look at the intellectual space and the discourse all over the world, it's rather than communist, it's more Marxist. So the Marxist argument that there is an oppressed and an oppressor, that there are those who dominate and there are those who suffer, basically what he points in terms of class struggle in his Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto. And so that kind of discourse is getting a lot of credence in the US, of course, because of the history of the US in terms of race relations and the George Floyd protest that happened last year. And so the intellectual discourse is creating this kind of, conversation that there is always an oppressor and there is always an oppressed, and that there has to be some level of equitable coming together, right? And so, as you said, in India too, that discourse is there in terms of the oppressed and the oppressor. For example, a majority that dominates the minority. And some of the Northeast conflicts that I talked about is also influenced by that kind of discourse. But what has changed is that, unlike, say, the 1960s and the 70s, where we did not have a computer, none of us had a personal computer. We just had an ability to converse, say, in a coffee house or when we meet physically or through our phones, which were not the mobile phones we have today. But today you have social media where
Geographical boundaries have like completely
yes,
they don't
like
exist anymore.
exactly, like I'm able to talk to you across oceans today, and I feel like I'm talking to you like in a coffee place, right? It's completely compressed distances and spaces. So time and space has been compressed. So in this particular context, this discourse has got even more platforms and othering. So one of the factors that I have studied as an academic is to look at how we create this structural process where we other others. So basically, I am a victim and you are responsible for my victimhood, right? And sometimes holding people personally responsible. And so because of that, this particular discourse is getting a lot of credence. And actually, because I've studied ethnic conflicts in not just in India, but also in Southeast Asia and Africa, including as part of my PhD. I studied the conflict in Kosovo and Serbia. I see that this kind of structural othering cannot always have good results, despite the fact that we hope it'll lead to good results, like an equitable, egalitarian society. It can actually lead to divisions coming out and creating even more class consciousness, which is not good.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is not good for a democracy, because in a democracy you want to have the capability and the platform to have different ideas and conversations, but you also want to have faith in an institution that you would believe is representative of all, right? But I mean, the state is never perfect. it's a very new phenomenon. The modern state started in 1648, the Westphalian system. So it's not like the empires of old, which have been for here forever. And some empires were better than others. And so it's not too long that we have democratic systems. We had authoritarian systems. And so my concern is that if you continue the othering process, there will come a time when it'll actually result not in an equitable and just society, which we all work for and hope for, but will create defense mechanisms and actually sometimes increase the division in society. I don't know what your perspective is on this, but at least this is what given the fact that I joined this study, US and internal US political culture, or India, but I have studied several countries, I have seen that this can actually lead to further division.